Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight for our 2017 Mansfield Reads program. Before we get started, I want to point out the fire exits. Of course, the front door where you came in, and then there's one over here in this corner and one over here in this corner, just in case. I want to satisfy the city fire marshal. I'm Carol Ann Grantham. I'm president of the Friends of the Mansfield Public Library. While this is the main event we have every year, the Friends of the Library do much more. We are an all-volunteer, nonprofit organization, and our mission is to actively support the library through fundraising, promotion, and advocacy. What this means is that we are the library's booster club and cheerleaders. We advocate for the library by being in contact not only with our mayor and city council, but also our state and federal representatives. Our fundraising comes mostly from our ongoing used book sales, and we're always welcome donations for that. We also sell book bags, electronic bookmarks, pencils, and erasers. And we have those for sale at the back if y'all are interested. You might ask, why do we need to raise money for the library? Doesn't the city fund the library? Well, of course it does. However, there are always a few items that are not covered by the library's budget, so that the Friends step in to help pay for those. And every year, the library gives us a wish list. This year's list covers a movie license, which we've already used. We showed a movie based on one of our this year's Reads authors' books called Mistress of Spices. We showed that a few weeks ago at the Far Best Theater. We also, on the wish list, we have funded Family Place, workshops and supplies. Some of the other things are the Summer Reading Club and the Books for Babies programs, which will soon be funded, and also the purchase of 4 or 5 laptop computers and other library programming. And the Friends always welcome new members. Any of the Friends that are here tonight, they're the ones that you see buzzing around, trying to keep things going. We'll be glad to answer any questions you have about our group. You can also find out more information about us from our brochure. We have some of those up there also by the products that we sell, and there's also a form there you can fill out to become a member if you aren't already. Now I'd like to introduce the dignitaries that are here tonight. We have City Manager Clayton Chandler, City Councilmember Darryl Haynes, the Assistant Chief of Police Kyle Lanier, Shelley Lanners, our Deputy City Manager. We also have Dr. Wendy Collini, who's on the Parks and Rec Board, and she's been a long-time supporter of the Friends group as well. And we have several members of the Library Advisory Board here with us tonight. We have Sherry Chambers, Suzanne Evans, Cynthia Gray, Bobby Quinton, and Shelley Donis. And Shelley is also an active member of the Friends group. You'll see her. She's the one in the flowery dress right there. Now I'd like you to welcome Yolanda Botello. She is on the library staff here, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the library.
Hi, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our library. My name is Yolanda Botello. I am the Youth Services Librarian here. Like Carol Ann said, we couldn't do a lot of the programs we do, the extra programming we do without the Friends' help. One of the biggest programs that they help us to provide for the community is the Summer Reading Club, which we're gearing up for in about a month. We have 8 weeks of programs. I want to say we do about 120 programs in those 8 weeks for children, babies, teens, and adults, and we're really focusing on family events this year also. So if you guys have any questions, we have staff all around. If you see us, we're all wearing our little rose bookmarks here. Ask staff about the programming we go give for the community, and ask staff about anything that any questions you have for us. We're all here to help, and again, just welcome to our library.
Now I would like City Councilmember Darryl Haynes to come forward. And our author, Chitra Banerjee.
This is a pleasure. The mayor said that he's very sorry that he could not make it today. And I said, I'll do it, because this is very special. And I've made a friend up here, I want you to know. She has taught me some things already about creative writing and talking about your family, writing your family down, your history. Anyway, I'm going to let her talk about that. It's so cool. But anyway.
Yeah. I've given him homework to do.
I love it. Okay. On behalf of the Friends of the Library, the City of Mansfield, and all of these people here, and myself, the city manager, we want to thank you for being here very, very much. We thank you. And I would like to present you with the key to the city.
Thank you. Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
Yes.
Thank you.
What a pleasure. I'm going to treasure this. I'm going to keep it carefully. And it is a great pleasure to be here in Mansfield. I am so pleased and appreciative that my book, Oleander Girl, has been chosen for the Mansfield One Read. I think a citywide read is such a good idea, and it's such an important idea right now, especially as I think we need to come together as diverse communities, and we need to appreciate each other's experiences, because together we make a stronger America. And I think a one book program really helps to do that. And I was listening, and I was so excited to hear all the wonderful programs people have been having around this book. And I think maybe some of you were there. There's a cooking class, there was henna, there was yoga, there's all kinds of fun things. So I just want to thank everyone who was involved in this citywide program, and I'm so happy to be here today to be talking about the book.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Lindsey Perkins Wade, and I'm the Vice President of Mansfield Reads for the Friends. I hope when I'm done talking, and it won't be very long, that you'll walk away with an understanding that it truly takes a village to put on this event, and we couldn't do it without the support of various city officials, businesses, and individual supporters who choose to donate their time, money, and energy. More than 14 years ago, a handful of people passionate about literacy, learning, and this community decided to start what's known around the country as a One City, One Book program, where we select one literary work and encourage the entire community to read it at the same time. The idea for our specific program started in a shuttle bus at a library conference with 3 Friends members, including our current treasurer, Paula Highfill. Today, it's a cherished annual event that includes people from every facet of our community. This is my first event as chair of Reads, and because the program was already so impactful, this year we were able to try a few new things and raise even more awareness about the program and the library. For starters, we announced our book selection before the winter holidays and introduced online book sales and delivery. And in addition to this evening's event, we had a record 16 related programs at the library and around the city, thanks to our fantastic program coordinator, Shelley Donis, and wonderful librarians Steve Standifer, Yolanda Botello, Faria Matten, and John Miller, along with the rest of the top-notch staff here. We partnered with the Mansfield Commission for the Arts to host a movie night at Far Best Theater in downtown. The Mansfield Parks and Recs Department worked with us on an Oleander Plantings event, and the Mansfield Historical Society, Mansfield Rocks, and Ben Barber Innovation Academy worked with us to host a genealogy workshop, children's craft time, and a cooking class. You may not know it, but we ask every Reads author to talk to our high school students before they come speak at the evening event. We want our teenagers to see what's possible, invite them to explore new worlds, encourage them to think critically, and be exposed to different perspectives. All of this speaks to the heart of Mansfield Reads and why it was started in the first place. We want to thank the high school librarians for being such gracious hosts today as well. We're incredibly grateful for the unwavering support coming from the mayor and various council members, as well as the communications staff in City Hall. We're also grateful to our sponsors, including Atmos Energy, Hornberg Real Estate Group, JMH Printing, Mansfield News Mirror, Meredith Minter at the Minter Group at VIP Mortgage, and Mauser Electronics. There are many more, and I encourage you to look at the back of the bookmarks that were on your chair. Without their financial and in-kind support, we wouldn't be here. I have yet to mention our dedicated Reads Committee, whose members have put in countless hours and includes my sharp co-chair, Chris Wagner, tireless Friends President, Carol-Ann Grantham, and longtime Reads VP, Jenny Elliott, in addition to Paula and Shelley. We've also had support from the Friends Board and volunteers that have helped us promote Reads at various events this year. If I were to list them all, we'd be here all night. As Carol-Ann stated earlier, the Friends are an all-volunteer nonprofit. We have no full-time staff and no foundation to finance us. We rely on the generosity and values of the people in our community, and what we are able to accomplish is a reflection of that. This event would not be what it is without everyone mentioned tonight and then some. I hope you take the time to shop at one of the local businesses, say thank you to a volunteer, or come back and find out what your library has to offer. And now I'll get to what you've all been waiting for. Our esteemed guest is an award-winning and best-selling author, poet, activist, and professor of writing. Her work has been published in more than 50 magazines, including The Atlantic and The New Yorker, and her writing has been included in more than 50 anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Prize Stories, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. She's an American Book Award winner and the author of more than a dozen books, the most recent of which is Before We Visit the Goddess. Her work is beautifully crafted, her accomplishments far-reaching, and her speaking engagements met with glowing reviews. Please join me in giving a big, warm welcome to the author of Oleander Girl, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni.
Thank you. Thank you. It is such a pleasure for me to be here. Can you all hear me in the back? Yes, I think. Great. So it really is a pleasure. I've had a great day today here in Mansfield. As you heard, I went to 2 high schools and I talked to a lot of students and teachers and librarians, and now I'm here to have, I hope, a fun evening with you folks. I know all of you are busy. I know you have many choices of where to spend your evening, and I'm delighted that you've chosen the best one. So, Oleander Girl. I'll talk a little bit because people were asking me earlier, how did I get started as a writer? So I'll talk a little bit about that. Then I'll talk about Oleander Girl, and then I'll talk a little bit about my new baby, Before We Visit the Goddess, which has just now come out in paperback. So, when I was growing up in India, where I spent the first 19 years of my life, I had no idea that I was going to be a writer. And this is somewhat unlike many writers I've met ever since, because a lot of writers I come across, including some of my students at the creative writing program at the University of Houston, where I teach, they say that, well, from the time I was little, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I did not. Growing up in India, I always loved reading, and I've always been a reader, and I knew I wanted to teach. I knew I wanted to teach literature, but I didn't think I was going to be a writer. I did not think that I had a story to tell that anyone would be interested in, because I grew up in India, in the city of Kolkata, in a very traditional Bengali family, and I thought my life was just like everyone else's. I mean, what story was there to tell? it was only after I moved to the United States, when I immigrated here and I started going to graduate school, and I started looking at the lives of people around me, that I realized a few things. One is that I was wrong in that everyone has a story to tell. Everyone does have a story to tell, because all our lives are unique and meaningful and special. But we just have to find the language and the way, the method, to tell that story so that it will touch other people. And that is something I had to learn slowly and with difficulty over the years. And the second thing that I realized is that immigration is an amazing experience. It changes the world you live in. You move into a place that is almost like a new world. Because when I moved to the United States, life was so different. I moved to go to school here. I was on campus. It was the first time I was away from my family. I was in a culture where so many things were very different and almost opposite of how I grew up. And there was a lot going on. Just in myself, I could see I was excited, I was nervous, I was feeling challenged, I was feeling homesick, I missed my family and my friends, but it was a great adventure as well. And so, for me, I discovered that immigration is one of the greatest adventures that we go through. And then as I learned more about America, I realized, well, and that is the adventure that made America what it is. Because most of us here, unless we were Native Americans, at some point our families immigrated. And that has created this wonderful and diverse group, and all of the diversities and complexities of the ways in which we relate to each other. And that gave me a lot of strength and a lot of purpose, and made me feel that, yes, my story, the story of my people, is interesting and important too. I need to learn how to write it properly, but it is a worthwhile story. And that's what I was telling the students in the schools today, and that's what I'll tell you. Each one of us has a story, and listening to each other's stories and sharing our story with the other people around us is really, really important, and I hope you will find more and more opportunities to do so, because that's what brings us together as a community. And as I said earlier, sometimes a citywide book read can be that vehicle, because as we read the same book, we can connect it to our own experiences and then talk about our lives with other people in that context. So I came and I started writing. By the time I started writing, I had already finished all of my formal education. I had my PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. I was teaching, and I started writing, but very tentatively. I would write at night. I was very shy about my writing. I never showed it to anyone, and I wondered if my writing was any good at all. And in fact, it wasn't very good at that point. And I share this with you because, sometimes people feel, well, I want to be a writer, I want to write a story, but I'm not very good at it. Well, neither was I. But I learned something important about writing, which is that if you keep at it and you get some instruction and you get some feedback about how to edit, and then you go ahead and you revise and you revise and you revise some more, you get better, because that is what happened to me. So at first I would write things and I'd send them to magazines, and they'd get sent back really quick with notes that basically said, this is nice, but don't quit your day job yet. But then I did get better and things started getting published. So that's how I came into writing. And what do I write about? Some of the things that I love to write about is life in India and the story of immigration. So people who came from India to America who are coming because, immigration is that continuing story that is happening and is undergoing some complexities and difficulties at this time, but it is still part of the American story. So what happens? How are we changed by America? How do we change America as we live here? That continues to be a matter of some interest to me. So now I know some of you have read this book, so I'll talk a little bit about the story. And then I'll talk a little bit about the kinds of research I did, because sometimes people like to know about what kinds of research writers do. So to write Oleander Girl is the story of a young woman, Karubi, who grows up in Kolkata, which is the city where I was born and spent many years of my life. And she grows up in the home of her grandparents. Her grandparents bring her up. And she loves her grandparents. Her mother dies in childbirth. And but before she dies, her mother tells her mother, this is Karubi's grandmother, that I want my daughter to be named after the oleander. Karubi means, in my language, Bengali, it means oleander. So one of the questions in the book is, why would her mother want her to be named after the oleander, which is a beautiful plant, but also, as you know, what is it? Poisonous. Okay? So, but I'm not going to give away that answer. And those of you who have read it, you don't give it away either. Make the others read. All right. So Karubi's growing up, and her family is very traditional and old-fashioned, and they live in an old part of the city of Kolkata in a mansion that's like over 100 years old. And as I grew up in India, I was fascinated by these old houses. And every time I'd pass one, I would wonder, like, what kind of history does this house have? If this house could tell a story, what story would it tell? So I wanted to put a house like that into this book. She's growing up there, she's going to college, and she meets this young man. Through friends, she meets a young man, Rajut, who comes from a very rich and successful and westernized family. They own an art gallery. And so this young man is, he's uber cool. He goes to all the discos and he goes to all the nightclubs and he introduces her to this life. And he falls in love with her and wants to marry her. Her grandparents say yes, which is in itself a minor miracle because they come from such a different background. But I think they see that he really loves her, so they say yes. And the book will begin as she's getting engaged. Now, but then she finds out that her grandparents have kept a big secret from her. Now, I love secrets, so I had to put a secret in my book. A secret is very powerful because it often impels us in various directions. When we find out about secrets, they change our notion of the world and of ourselves. And so Karubi hears about this secret, but she doesn't know the answer to the secret. And so it shakes up her notion of who she is. And so she puts off her wedding and she comes to America in search. So in some ways, this book follows an ancient archetypical pattern that many of you might know, called the hero's journey, where the hero goes in search of something that will transform their lives. But they do have to go through a lot of adventures and a number of dangerous situations, and so will she. So this is the story of Karubi when she comes to America, what she discovers, and she will get an opportunity where she'll get a choice. Does she want to remain in America with some wonderful people she meets here, or does she want to go back to her fiancé who was waiting for her? Her fiancé, on the other hand, at the same time is having his own challenges, because this book is set in 2002. And I purposely set it there because that was a very fraught time, not just in India, but in America as well. It was soon after 9/11. And 9/11 really shook us up, I think, as a nation. And it had a lot of impact in many different ways on a lot of people. First, it was a national tragedy. Many of us lost people we loved in the towers and in other similar places. And also, it was scary, it was frightening, but as a backlash against that, many immigrant communities were targeted. And people felt they were dangerous, people felt they were un-American, people were beaten up, businesses were vandalized, people got killed. So Karubi comes into America at that time, and she looks like those people who've been who are being discriminated against. So she faces that. She has to face that. At that time in India, right before that, there's a huge riot, a Hindu-Muslim riot. And the book will describe it, so I won't go into it. But the results of that are far-flung also. People who knew each other, worked with each other for years, were friends with each other, suddenly began to look at each other with suspicion and turn on each other. And Rajat, whose family owns a big factory where Hindus and Muslims work side by side, he has to face this problem, and he has to deal with the incidents that come up. Now, that's on a larger political front. On the personal front, Rajat is going to have other problems because there is an ex-girlfriend that Rajat has, and some of you, if you've read the book, you remember her, and she is, one could say she is a little manipulative, and she thinks, okay, Karvi's out of the picture, this is my chance, and then she is going to try and get Rajat back. So lots of things are happening on both sides. How is it going to end up? Of course, I'm not going to tell. But what I'll do is I'll read you a little passage, and then I'll tell you a little bit about this new book, which is about 3 generations of mothers and daughters in an immigrant family. And then we'll have time for a few easy questions. Right? Praise is also acceptable at that point. So I'm going to read right from the beginning. And this is a time this is the night before the engagement ceremony. And Karvi has just gone to bed. And she sleeps in her mother's bedroom, where her mother used to sleep when she was a child. And she's been sleeping, and then she has a dream, and she wakes up. And I'm reading from that moment. As my eyes adjust to the darkness, I know at once that someone is in the room. My heart flails around. It's impossible. I always lock the door before going to sleep, and the window is barred. But there it is, in the armchair in the corner of the night room, a still female form, black against the darkness, looking toward me. Mother, I whisper, my fear replaced by a yearning that's as old and as illogical as anything I can remember. I know so little about my mother, only that she died 18 years ago, giving birth to me, a few months after my father, an ambitious law student, had passed away in a car accident. Perhaps she died of a broken heart. I never knew for sure, because no one would speak to me of them. My grandparents had to put aside their own broken hearts to care for me, and I'm grateful. They did it well. Still, all through my years growing up, I longed for a visitation from my mother. Now, after I had armored my heart and accepted that she was gone from my life, here she is. How can I be sure it is her? There are some things we know in our breath, in our bones. And so she begins to wonder, why is her mother here? And she thinks maybe it's because she is going to be engaged, she's going to be married soon, maybe her mother is concerned. So she starts talking to her mother, and she says, she tells her about Rajat and his family and how wonderful they are. But after she's finished talking, the form is still sitting there. So she's like, there's something else. And then she sees this. Suddenly the window behind her is filled with light. Outside I see an ocean over which a sun is setting. Have I fallen then from one dream into another? My mother pointed over the ocean, leaning toward it with such sad longing that pain twists my heart. I understand. She hasn't come to learn about me. All the things I said to her, she probably knew them already, being dead. She has appeared now, instead, to tell me something. But what? Talk to me, Mother. This time, when she turns to me, I notice that my dream mother has no mouth. Her frame shivers with effort as though she longs to speak. She begins to dissolve. I can glimpse the ocean through her tattered body, waves breaking apart on rocks. An urgent sorrow radiates from her disappearing form. Then she's gone, and I am finally awake, blinking in the first rays of the sun, entering the room through the bars. I need someone to interpret this dream. It means something, I'm sure of that, coming at this crucial moment in my life. And so Korobi is going to go to her grandmother, and she's going to ask, and she's going to tell her, I think, the spirit of my mother visited me. And she's sure her grandmother will say, oh, what nonsense, you're just being fanciful. But instead, her grandmother takes it really seriously, and her grandmother appears really upset. And so Korobi's like, well, even if the spirit of my mother came, why would my grandmother be upset? Because that's her daughter. She'd think, my daughter's come kind of to bless me at this time. But her grandmother appears upset and almost scared. And so Korobi thinks maybe something is wrong. And then she's going to find out about the secret. And that's going to start her off on her adventure. Okay, so now before we visit the goddess, and this is my newest book. With each book, I try to teach myself something because I feel that there's just so much to learn as a writer. So when I was writing Oleander Girl, I wanted to tell the story in different voices. So some of the story is told by Korobi as the part I read. That's in first person. She speaks as an I. But then there will be other parts, the part that is from Rajat, her fiance's point of view, a part that is from her grandmother's point of view. There'll be parts that are from her mother-in-law's point of view. Her mother-in-law is a very interesting woman because, she's very powerful and she has very strong opinions. So I'm hoping that people enjoyed her section as they read it. And then there's a portion that is in the point of view of their chauffeur, because I wanted to show different, societal levels. I wanted to show how the different strata of society work together or work against each other and how they relate to each other. So that's some of that. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the research that I had to do with Oleander Girl. Now, I had to do a lot of historic research, for which I went to our local library, and libraries are wonderful for doing research. So, all right, I'll share the secret with you, which probably the librarians won't like, because I just go to my library and then I look real helpless and unhappy, and I go to the research librarian and I say, I have to find out about this subject because, I'm writing a book on it, and I look at them and I say, will you help me? And they are so nice. They always find all my books for me. So that's my little trick that I shared with you. Probably the librarians might not like that I told you this I was encouraging different people, you included, to research your family history. So librarians, there might be a lot of people coming in and looking helpless and asking you to find the books. Anyway, but some of the research I do is kind of, on-the-ground research. As I told you, Rajat is a real party goer, and he goes to a lot of nightclubs and discos, which in Kolkata they're known as discs. So I'm like, I can't write that part unless I go to a few nightclubs myself, go to a few discos. All right. So I'm in India. I went there to do some research, to visit my mother. My cousin lives in Kolkata. And so I tell him, you got to take me to a few of these places. And my wonderful husband, Murthy, who is there in the audience, hi, you can raise your hand, who's very supportive of my writing. Well, he's in America, he's working, and I'm in India, I'm doing research. So we usually have phone conversations. So he calls me and he's like, so what did you do yesterday? So I'm like, I went to a disc. I went partying with my cousin. And he's like, wait, didn't you just do that 3 nights back? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm researching. I need lots of sources, and I have to compare them. So that's some of the kinds of research that we do. So, okay, so that was about research. Before We Visit the Goddess is about a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. And I started writing this book soon after my own mother passed away, when I'd been thinking a lot about family and heritage and what it is that we pass on to our generations, the next generations, and what is it that we get. So I was thinking about what is it that I received from my mother and what it is that I've been trying to pass on to my sons. And I started thinking about how when we think of heritage, we usually think of positive things, right? That word has positive connotations. But it's more complicated than that, because if we're not careful, sometimes we pass on prejudices, we pass on, our fears of the world, and our children imbibe it so early that it becomes a part of them. So in this book, I wanted to address the complex question of heritage. I also wanted to address something that was important to my mother. Now, for many years of my life, my mother brought myself and my two younger brothers up as a single parent, which was very difficult for her in a traditional society like India. And she often used to say to me, and she did it with, she did it with great love and great energy, but also with great difficulty. She often told me, I don't want you to have trouble when you grow up. I want to make sure that you are a successful woman. And as I was writing this book, I thought about that question. What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be a successful woman? Is there a price one has to pay for that? Is there a backlash one has to face? And so these three women, the grandmother who lives in India all her life, the mother who immigrates to America, and the daughter who's born here and lives here all her life, they have to deal with, and they have to ask themselves questions about all of these things. Heritage, family, success, what do these things mean? Do they mean different things in different countries? Do they mean different things depending on the time in which you grow up? Or is there something universal that we can all learn about this thing? So it's about a family that is a complicated family, not a perfect family. It is a family where people love each other deeply, but maybe because they do, they have a lot of conflicts with each other as well. And it's about how we work through these conflicts in our lives. It's about how choices we make may have long-ranging effects that we can't even imagine when we make these choices. And so I certainly hope that you will take a look at this book as well. I thought I would read to you a little bit from the grandmother's story. Now, all of these books are fictional. They really don't have very much to do with my personal life, but they're connected in indirect ways. So, like the grandmother here grows up at the same time as my mother did in India. So this is soon after India's independence, when this woman, at that time, she's a young woman, she's about 18 years old, is going to college. And that was a time when not many women went to college. This woman, Shabitri, comes from a very, she comes from a very poor village family, and her family can't afford to send her to college. But a woman from the village, a rich woman who has a house in Kolkata, says, okay, well, if she gets into college, she can live in my house and she can go to college. So Shabitri comes and lives in her house, but this woman is not necessarily very nice to Shabitri. She's like, oh, I'm doing you this big favor. And then she finds out that Shabitri and her son, the son of this rich woman, are becoming too friendly. And when she finds that out, she throws Shabitri out of the house. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from this portion. I want you to imagine this life, because I think that's the great thing. That's the magic of fiction. We imagine lives that are not like ours, that are set in different times and places, and we find some kind of human connection. We find compassion. Our own lives grow because of that. So here's this girl. She doesn't know much of the city. Kolkata is a huge city. She only knows college and this woman's house. It's evening. This woman has thrown her out of the house, and she has very little money. She doesn't know what she'll do. And then she decides she's going to go to the college, because the college, she remembers, there's a reason. Okay, and I'll read that. The college, and this is the men's college, because she had to go for all her math and science classes to the men's college. That's the only place they taught math and science. So she reaches the men's college. The men's college loomed eerily in the gloom. She slipped through the gate, thankful that the gate man wasn't there to stop her, and ran up the stairs. On the second story, at the end of a corridor, there was a small room with a plaque on it, Women's Common Room. She had gone there once exploring with her friends. It was piled with dusty furniture and smelled of mice droppings, but there was a bolt on the inside and a small toilet. She could stay there for the night. Tomorrow, she couldn't handle the thought of tomorrow yet. When she reached it, the door to the common room was padlocked. The strength went out of her, and she slid to the floor, unable to hold in her sobs any longer. Terror and rage. But foremost was the fear of what might happen to her tonight when the night watchman came by. Would he throw her out on the street? Would he do worse? Beneath it all roiled the humiliation. What would her parents, her relatives, her village say if they knew she'd been kicked out of the Mitir home like a dog? No one would care that the love she and Rajiv, the young man, had felt for each other was pure and beautiful. She had been weeping too hard to hear the footsteps. When she felt a hand on her shoulder, she flinched and cried out, throwing up her arms to protect herself. Yes, wickedly I ended there. Thank you so much. And now for those easy questions from the audience.
I'm curious whether when you came here for college, whether you intended to stay at that time or how you ended up staying here and why, and what you miss about India.
That's a great question. No, when I came here, I had intended, like many students do, I had intended to go home after I got my degree. There were a number of reasons I stayed on, but number one reason is sitting right there. That's my husband, whom I met while I was going to graduate school, and then we married, stayed on. Yes, and I'm very thankful and happy that I stayed on in America. I feel like now I have two homes, two cultures to call my own, and my life has been greatly enriched by this fact.
Another question? Oh.
How long did it take you to get published?
How long did it take me to get published? Too long. It took me several years, actually, as I was working on getting better as a writer. And then I started publishing short stories and poems in magazines. And then I took a class at a community college where I was teaching at that time. And the professor in that class introduced me to an agent. And then she really liked my work, and that was very helpful because she took my stories to New York and she showed them to publishers, and that's how I got published with my first book, Arranged Marriage, which went on to win an American Book Award. And after that, things became much easier in terms of publication. So the other question that people often ask is it important to get an agent? And at a certain point, if you have a book that you want to publish, it really helps if you do get an agent. And there are many ways to find agents, and your wonderful librarians will tell you how to.
Hello.
Hi.
In your creative writing class, are you students expected to either write a poem or a short story by the end of the semester?
In my creative writing classes, now we have a whole program at the University of Houston. So fiction classes are taught by fiction professors like me who are writing fiction. Poetry classes are taught by the poets. by the end of the semester, they have to write several pieces. Yes. So in my short story classes, they will write 2 complete short stories, but they'll also write scenes. As they're learning to write a short story, I'll start them off with little smaller things, like a scene, a dialogue where 2 characters are in conflict, or a setting where the story's set in, a very powerful and unusual locale. And then they'll start putting those ideas together. They'll write their short stories. This is my undergraduate class. In my graduate classes, also they're expected to write, but many of them now are writing novels. So they'll be writing chapters of their novels. And in order to get their degree, by that time they have to have a complete manuscript, a book, before they go, yes. And often they go on to then publish that book afterwards. And I know there are people in the audience. So, I'm in Houston, but I know that in the Dallas area, there are lots of workshops that people can participate in, and often the universities and community colleges also have these classes, creative writing classes, that are open to the community. And the wonderful thing about being in a class is you get so many people to give you feedback on your work, and that helps you grow very fast. Because otherwise, it's slightly problematic, because, you could ask your family, but now you put them in a tough spot, because what are they going to say? And I have to share this story about my husband and I and how we worked this out. So, he would read my work, and then he would give me very good comments, but I was a bad person. I didn't want to hear criticism from him, and we would get into all these fights. And then I solved the problem. I created a little list, and I put some words on the list, and I said, you can give me feedback, but it has to be a word from this list. and you can imagine the words that were on this list. They were words like awesome, and wonderful, and superb. And my favorite was the phrase, honey, you've outdone yourself. So I happily share these words, and you can create your own list, which will help you maintain amity with your family members. But that's why it's important to join a writer's group. Okay.
Do you have movie offers, or would you entertain that?
Say that one more time.
Movie offers?
Yes. Yes, actually one of my books has been made into a film. The question is, have I had movie offers? And would I like that? My first novel, Mistress of Spices, is a movie, and it's available. I think you can see it on YouTube. It's in like chunks, the way sometimes YouTube breaks it out. And you might be interested in it. It's a magical tale of a woman who works in an Indian grocery here in America. But what's special about her is when you walk into that grocery and, to buy your groceries, she can look into your life and look into your heart. And she knows what kinds of problems you have and what are the things you want to change about your life. And she'll give you a spice infused with magical powers to help you with that. Now, the problem is sometimes the magic works in a way that she didn't quite intend. So other things begin to happen. But that is now a movie. And the actress in that movie, her name is Aishwarya Rai, and some people in the audience might know her. And she is she got the title of being the most beautiful woman in the world. So guys in the audience, you might just want to check that movie out.
So a creative writing class stroke recommended The Writer's Journey as a book to read. And that
Say that one more time.
A creative writing program I took recommended a book called Writer's Journey, which seems to lay down several steps to follow when writing a story, especially a novel. I was wondering whether you have found something like that helpful, or do you just follow an idea and see where it leads?
No, I think it's very helpful to have a process to follow. So if that book works for you, you should definitely try it. Now, the thing is that, they'll tell you things to do and various steps and maybe how to write an outline and how to revise. And, you have to try it out. because all of us, we write differently. So something that works for me as a writer may not be exactly what works for you, but at least it'll give you a template. So it's a great place to start. And then you see what else works for you, and maybe look up a couple of other books, and and again, our wonderful librarians will help you find those books, and see how different methods work for you. The most important thing is to have a strong idea that you feel passionate about. Because especially if you're writing a book, you're going to stay with it for quite a while. And it's got to be an idea that really touches your heart and you feel strongly about. Yes?
Biggest difference between India and Texas? You've lived in both.
The biggest difference between India and Texas, that is a very tough question. I'll tell you what's similar. It's hot in both places. I think a big difference is maybe, this is the India I grew up in, which is now very different. I go back to India fairly regularly, and India too has changed. But I think the India I grew up in was a very stable society. People didn't move around much. So you would have like many generations staying in the same city and maybe even in the same house. And I grew up, my grandfather lived with me for a long time when we were growing up. So when I came over here to Texas and to Houston in particular, it's a very transient kind of moving culture. People come, people go, they come for work. Their original families may be somewhere very far. And it's a much more diverse society. It is, and that part is very exciting because I met people coming from so many different places in the world. And I would never have met people like that in India. So I think those are two big things. I'll tell you one other thing. I think if you had a kind of continuum, an equation, where on one side you had individuality as a value, and the other side you had family as a value. In India, we're much more close to the family end. Family matters more. But I think here in Texas, and probably in the United States, I find that individuality is a big thing. And of course, I think success lies somewhere in between, balancing the needs of family with the needs of me as an individual. But that was something I had to struggle with when I moved here.
So, life as a novelist, writing complicated stories with complicated characters. When you're writing the story, how do you keep the individual character stories consistent? How do you not forget something that's happened and by accident negate yourself or contradict yourself elsewhere?
Okay, that's a great question. As I'm writing a novel particularly, which is long and has lots of characters, how do I keep things straight? How do I not repeat? How do I not contradict? How do I remember my characters? Every writer does this differently, but I do a lot of outlining. And I will have like a notebook just for my characters where as I'm creating the characters, I'm writing down their characteristics so that I can always go back and refer to them. And these are useful things to do. But ultimately, when I'm writing that novel, I have to stay really focused on it. And I have to write pretty much every day. If I get away from the story for too long, then I lose the power of the story. I fall out of that fictional universe. There's a term that we writers use. It's called the fictive dream. It's like as we're writing, we enter this dream world, as it were. And if you're going to write and be successful, you've got to stay in that world. You can't get away from it too long, because then you begin to forget. Otherwise, you don't, because it's just like living your real life, how you don't forget what your friends are like, or what your spouse is like, or your children are like. You don't forget your characters. They're very real to you. But if you fall out of that fictive dream, if you don't write regularly, you'll begin to forget. So I do other things. I outline, I have a notebook, but really they have to live here and here. Otherwise, I can't write them.
I have a follow-up question. When you have a character in mind, the characteristics of a character in mind, do you ever find yourself drawing a picture of what this person looks like?
That's a very interesting question. Do I ever draw like a physical picture? No, I don't. Although, for many years I was an artist, and so I do think in visual terms, so I will draw word pictures, like when, there'll be a scene where Korobi is getting ready for her engagement, and she's wearing like this silk sari, and her grandmother's helping to get her dressed. She's putting on her jewelry. So I imagine it visually, but I won't draw it. No, I will draw it in words. Because, first of all, I don't know that I could draw it. And then secondly, I want to keep it in the medium of words. I don't want to get away from that medium. But, different things work for different people. So if you think that might be something that works for you, certainly you should try it.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. The last one, the best one, and this is from one of our high school teachers. Her class was there in the morning, and they were wonderful.
The kids could not stop talking. They were late to their next classes. We went back up to the classroom.
Can people hear in the back? Because she's saying like nice things. I want to make sure.
Is it on? Okay. The class could not stop talking. We went back up to the classroom after your visit, and we had like a little round table discussion, and they all had their notes, and even children that don't normally have a lot to say or write, because we have some of those too. I was really pleasantly surprised, some of the comments that they had. They thoroughly enjoyed you. They think you're cooler than, anything. But they did. Totally awesome.
I think people in the back didn't hear that. Maybe
Yes. But they did have a question about your character development, because some of them wanted to know what happened to the chauffeur. What happens to Rajit's little sister? What happens? And they wondered if you ever take those characters into your other books, or are you planning on developing them at a later point?
Well, that's a very good question, because at the end of Oleander Girl, and at the end of many books that you read, not just books by me, but other authors, there always will be unanswered questions, because one story ends, but the larger life story goes on. So I always want to leave my readers thinking about that, thinking about my characters, because I feel if you close a book and then you're done with it, that's not very powerful. But if you close a book and you're forced to think about those characters, that book is working. So that's the kind of book I want to write. Now, will they come back? Will there be another book? I don't know. I never know until, I only know like the next book that I'm going to write. And sometimes, like I have a book called Sister of My Heart, which was a national bestseller. It became very popular. It was about two young women, girls really, when the book starts, growing up in India. They're cousins, but they all live together in this one family. And then they get married in very different places. And the book ends with that movement. They've gotten married and what happens in their marriages. Now, people were always like, well, but what happens after that, and after that, and after that? And I said, I don't know. And then some years later, I kept thinking about those characters. They just came back into my mind. And I felt like they had more for me to write. And so then I wrote a sequel called The Vine of Desire. But when I had written the first book, I hadn't thought I was going to write a sequel. So who knows? Who knows what might happen in the future? But meanwhile, I'll be happy if you finish Oleander Girl and then you're thinking, what happens to them? Now, are they going to, I'm not going to tell you what you're going to think about. So, well, I guess that is our final question. Thank you. Your class was just wonderful. Truly, it was, I can tell that, they were so interested. They had read the book so carefully. They asked wonderful questions. So please thank them for that.
Isn't she great?